Hello, I'm Wendy Reifer, the VP of Client Management at ePractice Manager. We're glad to have you with us today for a webinar, part of our series on improving management within practices. Today, we'd like to take up an important topic, which has to do with leadership and problem solving. I would say that most, if not all of our clients encounter this at some point. And so we wanted to get into some of the finer details of how to approach this issue, what you can do about it, and some real practical things that you can put to use right away. And it's an important topic. Practices have issues. Over time, we've seen that the ones that survive very well account for this idea. They understand that mistakes will be made and tasks will be missed and problems will arise. It's not necessarily bad news when there are changes and problems in a practice. Sometimes it is, and sometimes it's quite frustrating, but we know, all of us, just from life, that the only constant is change. A practice is in a situation where the environment is constantly changing. Even with your individual patients, the treatment can change, your overall schedule of all your patients can change, the market itself can change. When you're looking to grow a practice, you're creating change of your own design. Sometimes the world outside around us changes, and there are more examples of this. So if we know that change is happening and that problems can result from that, our best approach is to get ahead of things. We want to be proactive about what lies in the road ahead and how we're going to navigate that as we go along. Again, accounting for this, it makes for a more stable practice and practice operation for everyone involved. So owners and managers, sometimes they avoid what they're seeing. It's difficult to confront. And they may have the idea that if you acknowledge a situation or you have to tackle that situation, it can become overwhelming. And that's true. But I would submit to you that some of the situations that you're faced with when you don't tackle these problems can be equally or even more overwhelming. So we want to understand that there are times where getting to the quote unquote treatment is the best course of action. In fact, if it was your patient, you would talk to him or her and let them know that you'd love to have the opportunity to tackle the treatment that they need when it is as small as it is. Gives you the opportunity to avoid the complications that come from neglect and delay and that sort of thing. Well, it's no different when it comes to the management of a practice and an issue that you're faced with. If you're going to now get slower and proactive and tactical and wise and all of those things, we have to make sure that we don't say, okay, now I'm brave and I'm going to start tackling these issues on a proactive basis. Well, a lot of times a practice can get into the ready, shoot, aim mentality of that. And that happens a lot in practice management. So this is partly because of frustration. Sometimes you have an acute situation or a consequence that rises to the point that everybody becomes quite impulsive. And oftentimes you don't have all the information that's required to make good decisions and tackle this issue for real. In those circumstances, it actually happens that the solutions that you enact are short-lived, they're not particularly effective. So looking at this impulsivity and getting it out of the equation as much as possible is a really big part of things. So the first thing for us to recognize is that the doctor and the manager are responsible for the observation of the problematic areas in a practice and should start taking this role and responsibility seriously and looking at it as a benefit that you can have. If you are framing these things as potential roadblocks that you and your team are about to encounter, you can eradicate those before you encounter them. You can navigate them more easily. Everybody has an easier time of it if you can get ahead and understand that this observation process is actually looking for potential problems. So once you have some insight into an area that needs attention, let's say your schedule is running behind constantly, instead of letting these things go on and on and on, thus building the frustration and probably making the problem worse, what we want to focus on is starting a course of action, which can amount to just confronting that an issue exists. So once you think that there's a problem, there probably is a problem. So let's enter a somewhat passive phase having to do with this. And it doesn't have to go on for a very long time, but try to take a moment to quietly observe the issue before getting vocal with your team about the problem. Take a look at it and see what's really going on. Was this an exception? Or another great question to ask is, should we tackle this given other priorities that we're focusing on right now? Once you've taken a good look at it, you're going to say, great, I'm ready to take this to the team. So now it's a matter of gathering up information that is needed. This can happen in a somewhat passive way. You don't have to make a major announcement about everything that's being done, but you can go to particular staff and ask them for some stats, ask them for some reports from your practice management software, ask them for the protocols that are in place having to do with, again, this example of scheduling. Do a quick projection on the management side of things to get an idea of how this issue is actually impacting the practice. Are you losing revenue? Are you turning over staff? Are you affecting customer service? What really is the impact of this problem in day-to-day practice operations? So now you've got a lot of information and you've had a chance to watch this and see how big of a problem it is. This is the time that you want to have a meeting with the associated staff. You're going to bring this issue to light. Even before you have the meeting, plan beforehand what it is that you want to accomplish in this meeting. A good idea is for you to have delegation in mind. This is one of the things that keeps doctors and managers from tackling a subject if they believe that they're going to have to do every bit of the work, the investigation, the troubleshooting, the handling of any backlogs involved, the ongoing process itself, the oversight of it. They, again, will get overwhelmed and not necessarily continue with the course of action. So have this delegation in mind. And let's say you have 4 people in the meeting. One person could get a task having to do with gathering up information, reports, etc. Another person gets a task having to do with potential solutions. So doing some general research, taking a look at existing resources, looking at vendors. Another person can tackle this from the point of view of, what do other people do to solve this problem? This is a great time to loop in another practice or networking group that you have, a consultant, someone along this line to say, okay, well, we can't be the only people in the world with this problem, so what do other people do? And another person who's kind of observing it as we're going along. Just some general delegation goes a very long way. So at the end of that meeting, everybody's got some light task work to do, contributing to an overall solution, and you schedule a next meeting. You get back together, you make a decision. Here are our potential solutions. We've chosen this one. How are we going to proceed with the implementation? Great. Everybody goes their separate ways, takes their slice of the work. Well, now we need to write it up and say we've decided to do this and really detail that in writing for the staff who are involved. Remember, there's not just this moment in time, but there's the future. You're going to have other staff who are hired or other staff who are trained, and having a detailed list of this information and the steps that are going to be taken and making sure that it's clearly written and everybody interprets that from the same written material. That's of great service to the practice moving forward. So now you're kind of in the situation of running what we would call a pilot with a new system in place. A pilot has a couple of components. It's experimental in nature, but it also has some tracking that's associated with it. That can come in the form of statistics, other ways of measuring results, like we were talking about the schedule. Perhaps we see how close we are running to on time in the new scheduling model. That gives you an opportunity as you go along to adjust your approach if it's not working, or reinforce your approach if it's been successful and say, okay, we did this with our mornings. Now we're going to continue that into the afternoons. We did this on Mondays. We're going to continue that to every day of the week. So with this experimentation and reinforcing, sometimes you'll need to issue a policy or a protocol in its final version. Sometimes you'll need to loop additional staff in. But as you can see, it goes from this phase of observing that there's a problem, how urgent is it, experimenting with some of the solutions, choosing a solution, delegating, and then watching what happens when you take this approach and then making your final steps to make it a durable part of the practice moving forward. So it can be a lot more simple and straightforward than doctors and managers think. They're often considering that they have to do all of the work themselves. They have to know all of the answers before they can begin. But the simplicity of being decisive and starting the process, spreading out this work, using effective delegation, and being responsible for the follow-through can make a huge difference. Your consultant at ePractice Manager can help you with an evaluation of the issue, a potential approach for the issue. So even on that side of things, you don't have to do everything yourself. Consider the start, and that the earlier the start, the better thought out the start, the more shoulders to the wheel involved with this, you can get a lot of benefit out of something like this. But we do want to account for the fact that it's not something that's just brewing in the offing. You have a right now problem, and it's on everybody's mind. It's quite obvious that it's going on. Well, in that case, the doctor and the manager responsibility for this issue lies first with leadership and then with problem solving. And we see this go off the rails all the time. It's completely understandable. When a practice has a problem, it's usually exacerbated by the fact that there's tension, there's stress in the situation. The frustration has risen because things aren't running smoothly. And at that point, we need to have our management team in charge first of the composure and the logic and the wisdom that are required to smoothly get us through the next steps of problem solving. So keep in mind, if they're too impulsive, if they're not well thought out, if you don't have all of the information, these are going to be short-term solutions anyway. They are not going to serve you very well. So I guess a comparison in this regard would be if you had a patient that experienced a complication during a procedure. The first goal in that clinical environment would be to bring composure to the team. We would want to make sure that we can respond quickly and handle the immediate situation. But having people flying off the handle and or lots of unnecessary communication at that point, that's not going to be in the best interest of the situation. So when a management problem comes to light, it is often because a practice has had a bad outcome. We've lost money. We've had some dissatisfaction on the part of a patient or a team member. We're running behind. We've skipped steps. We now are experiencing logjams and an inability to treat our patients because of something that got missed earlier, and it's all coming to light right now. So the first thing to think about is, when are we going to have the conversation about this? We want it to be calm. We want it to be logical. We want it to be well thought out. So just a simple step is, don't start the conversation when you can't finish it. A lot of people try and tackle this in the middle of patient flow. It gets quite heated and it can become quite abbreviated and difficult. You really don't have time to present and explore the entire issue. And this has to be a point of communication, both on the part of the team and on the part of the doctor or the manager. If it's just one set of information that's being given to the team member, we haven't really had time to explore it, and there could be holes in the theory or the solution that we don't get a chance to talk about. So once you get to the point where it's not during patient flow, you're able to start a conversation, it's good to have as much information as possible about how we got into this situation in the first place. So even the question asking process about this, you have to gather up some information, but don't get sucked into the conversation having to do with the whole issue. Just gather up the information. Sometimes you can lightly look at the schedule, see who made an appointment, see when the patient called in, see who referred or initiated the contact with the patient. All of those kinds of things do compile a picture having to do with this. Now we kind of have a twofold objective, and this is an important distinction to make. There is always, how did we get into this situation having to do with this particular patient or issue? But as a leadership topic, we want to find out how we're going to avoid being in this situation in the future. That kind of reframes the conversation. We're not necessarily looking for blame or trying to put a team member on probation or disciplinary action, something like this, we're really investigating the steps that led to the problem. This could be a person isn't familiar with a protocol, or a protocol doesn't exist, or a protocol was put on hold for a particular reason and never reverted back to the way that it should be done. There could be misunderstandings about a number of things having to do with the team members interacting with each other. So that's great. Now we're not just looking for blame. We're trying to see how it happened with this patient. We're trying to see how we're not going to be in this situation again. But take another step back for doctors and managers to really get honest about what are the reasons that we always scrape by on this subject, meaning it always seems to be right there as a problem to be had. And when we solve it for maybe the short term, but we're not confident that it's going to be a lasting solution that's going to continue for the practice. So this is a matter of looking to take an even bigger approach to the solution. Do we need a report that we generate periodically and review? Is there coordination that needs to occur between two different parts of the practice, gaining insight and finding out what the other department is experiencing so the opposing department can help with that? Do we have to assign primary responsibility for this function to one of your team members and even give that person the ability to coordinate all of our efforts along the way? When doing this, a doctor and a manager tend to modulate their tone. They are using objectivity, logic, and taking kind of a bird's eye view of the whole situation. And that brings composure to the team. And it also gives them some confidence that even though there may be work involved with making this type of change, it's going to be worth it in the long run. If you're experiencing that it's a recurring problem, so are they. They don't want to be in that situation of getting in trouble or being embarrassed with a patient any more than you do. So, some reliability that the solution that we're involved with here is going to make a difference. That's a big deal for everyone involved. So let's talk about how we go about enacting a change once we are at that stage. It could be due to a critical need. Problem solving in nature. It could be due to expansion efforts. We want to change things. So some examples of this have to do with things like the security or the IT measures in a practice, marketing, customer service. Oftentimes we're looking to modify a schedule, our case presentation approach and flow. Sometimes it's a financial matter for the practice. In any of these cases, there are usually a variety of options on how you're going to move forward. And we talked about doing some research and delegating and finding out what we're going to do. But another trouble spot for practices can be trying to do everything all at once. And if that's not the option, sometimes we default to doing nothing. There's too many options, we got overwhelmed by it, and we slow down and don't continue. So rather than either of those, let's consider some experimentation. Isolate one change or improvement and make an agreement with yourself and with your team that you're going to implement that and try it for a period of time. Actually give yourself that period of time to evaluate the workability of the situation. Again, back it up with those stats. Go ahead and schedule the next evaluation point, use those stats and some interviews with the staff and sometimes even the patients to see how that's going. This gives you the opportunity to now include that as an operating basis for the practice. And you can also choose that you don't want to continue with that option. One of the things that I like about this is that it gives you the opportunity to say, okay, we're going to include option A, but we're also going to add the next layer of this, which is option B. Do both. Sometimes by that time, you've had such an improvement that you can afford to do both. The staff is ready for it. They can see the benefits and you can build on what you've been doing already. If you make individual changes and you evaluate them properly, they're not muddled by other points that are unrelated. This leads to faster results and the next decision seems to come more easily. And one thing that we always try and keep in mind is we're setting people up to win in a business environment. That's part of the leadership that's involved. So if you can build the success of your next change upon the last action that you took. Your team is constantly accumulating confidence. Oftentimes the practice is gaining efficiency and income along the way. This is really a well-tuned situation and represents both the leadership and the problem-solving side of things for a practice. So I'm hoping that this will help you to incorporate a few of these points into your approach when you run into the next problem that you're presented with or the next bit of trouble that you want to get into for your practice for expansion purposes. With all of that in mind, please let us know if there's anything that we can do to be of help to you. Oftentimes, ePractice Manager has addressed this issue with another practice before. We might be able to start a conversation with you, give you some tips, gather up some information, evaluate the information with and for you, present some solutions, and just support you in your efforts for leadership first and problem solving second. In doing it this way, you're going to bring your whole team with you. And of course, the ultimate recipient is the patient who receives all of your help and goodwill along the way. So thanks for the time to address this. Appreciate you being with us. If you have any questions, please contact ePractice Manager and your consultant. We're happy to help you with that, and looking forward to you having some success in your practice using this approach. Take care. Thank you very much. Bye.